Welcome to the history section. We begin today by looking at the push to secure the interior of Española during the Second Voyage. Specifically, the movements into the Cibao province starting in early spring of 1494.
That's right. The timeline is very precise. The admiral leaves on Friday, March 14th.
And this is immediately after they've established the town of Isabela on the coast.
Exactly. And this westward push, it wasn't just exploration. It was a military and economic necessity.
The whole settlement depended on it.
The entire venture. They had to find the source of the gold that was promised to the crown. So they start their march from the Rio de las Cañas.
And they travel about, a league and a half?
Roughly 4.5 miles, yes, before they come across a much, much larger river.
And this is a critical moment, a success that really changes the psychology of the whole expedition.
It absolutely does. The river is named Rio de Oro, the river of gold.
Because they found gold dust right there in the banks while they were trying to cross.
Yes. And the crossing itself was difficult. The accounts compare it to the Ebro River in Spain in terms of size. It had a deep, swift current.
But finding that gold, that immediately justifies the entire journey up to that point.
It justifies the hardship, the investment, everything. It was proof of concept.
So what about the initial reactions from the indigenous peoples, seeing this large European force moving into their territory?
It's very revealing. They reach a large village, and the records say that many of the inhabitants just fled.
They ran for the hills.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Which shows this real apprehension, maybe even outright fear. It's a very different vibe from the interactions on the first voyage.
But not everyone fled.
No. And this is where we see a fascinating cultural detail. Most of the people who stayed, they secured themselves inside their homes.
And how do they do that?
By barring the entrances with crossed canes.
Just canes.
That's all. And what's interesting is that the documents note this was a kind of lock that was universally respected among the indigenous people themselves. No one would dare cross a barrier like that.
So you have to wonder, were they just relying on their own customs, hoping the Spanish would somehow understand and respect them?
It does suggest a kind of desperation, doesn't it? Relying on a cultural rule that the invaders couldn't possibly comprehend.
Following that encounter, they keep pushing towards the Cibao.
Yes, the expedition continues. They reach another river, which they name Rio Verde, the Green River.
And why that name?
Because of the shiny, round pebbles on its banks. It suggests a lot of erosion over a long time. They camp there.
And the next day, March 15th, they pass through more villages.
And see the same thing. The huts are all barred with those cane bolts. So this fear, or at least this caution, is spreading.
The journey was difficult, though.
Very arduous. They were weary, low on supplies. Eventually, they have to stop at the base of this really rugged mountain range.
Which they name El Puerto del Cibao.
The gateway to the Cibao, exactly. Because the documents are specific that the province itself, the real gold-bearing region, doesn't begin for another 11 leagues.
That's over 30 miles.
Right. Situated right between two major peaks in the central mountain range.
So on March 16th, they finally cross that mountain.
And the landscape changes completely. It's described as rough, stony, full of boulders. Very difficult terrain to move through.
But it's also covered in vegetation.
Dense vegetation, yes. And crucially, it's crisscrossed with rivers and streams that were carrying gold.
The physical geography was directly linked to the mineral wealth.
Absolutely. The idea was that heavy seasonal rains washed these minute grains of gold down from the mountains.
And they would settle in the river sands,
making the streams the easiest and richest places to collect it. This validated their entire objective.
And the scale of this place. They compare it in size to Portugal.
You do. And that's not just a casual comparison. That's political.
It's meant to impress the sovereigns back in Spain.
Of course. It's a way of saying, look at the size of the territory we've claimed for you. It's as big and potentially as wealthy as your rival. It's about securing future funding.
But the plant life was a bit different from the coast.
It was. Fewer broadleaf trees. The accounts mention mostly pines and different kinds of palms. A much more rugged botanical environment, which makes sense given the stony ground.
So they've mapped the area, they've confirmed the gold. The next logical step is defense.
Securing the asset. Which brings us to the very rapid construction of Fort Santo Tomás.
And we should remember, the Spanish weren't the first Europeans in this specific region.
That's a crucial piece of context. Alonso de Ojeda had already been through the Cibao.
So the indigenous residents had some idea of what was going on.
They knew the Spanish were there for one thing, gold. And that knowledge really shapes these initial interactions.
So when the admiral arrives, he isn't met with hostility.
No, he's met with gifts. The locals come out offering food and significantly gold dust.
Trying to placate them, perhaps?
Or maybe divert them. It's a gesture of goodwill, but it's a calculated one.
And the site for the fort itself was chosen very carefully.
Very strategically. It was on a defensible hill overlooking the mining country. It had a dual purpose.
Which was?
One, to dominate the gold fields. And two, to act as a secure refuge for any Christians operating deep in the interior, far from Isabella.
The construction itself. The details tell a story.
They do. 56 men were left as a garrison under Pedro Margaret. That included artisans for the building work.
And it was built quickly.
Very quickly, out of earth and wood. It was designed specifically to withstand an indigenous attack, which they clearly anticipated.
And while digging the foundations for the moats, they found something strange.
Yes. This is a really fascinating detail. They dug down to solid rock and then 2 L's below that.
An L is about 45 inches, right?
Roughly, yes.
Yeah.
So pretty deep under the rock, they found these masses of straw and clay.
And inside?
3 or 4 round stones, the size of large oranges, maybe cannonballs. And the text says they appeared to be shaped by human hands.
Which must have been baffling to them.
It prompted a lot of speculation. Was this some ancient, forgotten civilization? Had other people been here before? It just deepened the mystery of the island.
And they found other valuable materials nearby, too.
Right in the river, at the foot of the hill, they found stones of different colors, including marble and pure jasper. It confirmed the general richness of the area beyond just gold.
So with the fort secured, the focus shifts back to logistics and agriculture.
On Friday, March 21st, the admiral starts his journey back to Isabella.
And on the way, he meets the supply train.
He does, at the Rio Verde. The mule train with provisions that had been sent from the coast, a critical resupply for the new fort.
But the return journey wasn't smooth.
Not at all. The environment itself created problems. Heavy rains had swollen the Rio de Oro so much that it was completely impassable.
So they were stuck.
Forced to camp in indigenous villages for several days, just waiting for the water to go down.
Which led to more interaction with the local communities.
A necessary interaction. The Spanish were fed cassava bread and yams, which the locals willingly traded for trinkets.
A fragile, transactional relationship.
Exactly. Driven by the indigenous desire for European goods and the Spanish need for food.
The admiral finally gets back to Isabella on March 29th.
And his assessment of the place is overwhelmingly positive, despite the hardships. Particularly the fertility of the land.
The speed of growth was incredible.
It really was. Melons planted less than 2 months before were already ripe.
Cucumbers in 20 days.
Right. It confirmed the island's potential for self-sufficiency. Even the native wild grapevines were producing large, fine grapes.
What about European crops? Wheat, for example.
Same story. Wheat planted in January was already producing harvestable spikes. Chickpeas were ready in 25 days. And supposedly larger than the ones in Spain.
So the seeds were sprouting in just a few days.
3 days, according to the records. And even industrial crops like sugarcane germinated in 7 days.
So his conclusion was that the climate was good.
Moderate, healthful, similar to Spain. This evidence of fertility was a huge morale boost, providing tangible proof that this colony could be sustainable.
A morale boost that they were about to need. The land might have been fruitful, but the settlers were getting sick.
And that sickness, combined with dwindling supplies, led directly to security problems. Which brings us to the early conflicts and Spanish misconduct.
The first major threat comes in early April.
Yes, a messenger arrives from Fort Santo Tomás. Captain Pedro Margaret sends word that the indigenous people of the Cibao were getting restless.
Specifically, Cacique Caonabó.
A powerful local chief. He was preparing to mobilize his forces and march on the fort.
Which would have been a disaster for the Spanish.
A complete disaster. An attack on their only interior outpost threatened the entire enterprise. So immediate reinforcement was the only option.
And they sent it.
On April 2nd, the admiral dispatched 70 men with provisions and ammunition, plus another 25 specifically for garrison duty.
So they're shoring up the fort's defenses.
And the supply line. They realized the first road was poorly routed, especially for crossing rivers, so they started work on improving that infrastructure as well.
At the same time, back in Isabella, there's urban planning happening.
Yes. While he's preparing the ships for more exploration, he's also laying out the town in a formal grid of streets. And, crucially, ordering a wide channel to be dug to the river.
Why was the channel so important?
2 reasons. First, the town was a cannon shot away from the river, so it was for easier water access. But more importantly, it was to power a new grist mill.
To process flour.
Exactly. Because the provisions from Castile were almost gone. What wasn't eaten had spoiled in the tropical heat.
And this all coincides with a serious health crisis.
A very serious one. Many of the settlers were weak and ill. The cause was probably a mix of things, but the diet was a huge factor.
They weren't used to the local food.
Not at all. They had plenty of cassava and yams from the indigenous people, but their bodies weren't accustomed to it. It made them sick and weak.
So with everyone sick and the Spanish food gone, the admiral makes a big decision.
He does. He decides he only needs about 300 men to keep the island under control.
And the rest.
He decided to send them all back to Castile. The sick, the troublemakers, anyone who was excess to requirements.
But he still needed that grist mill built.
Desperately. But the workmen were shirking their duties. Sickness, low morale, who knows? The admiral literally had to stand over them to make sure the work got done, a clear sign that discipline was breaking down.
So what was his solution to all this?
He sent all the able-bodied men who weren't essential in the town out to the Vega Real.
With a dual mission.
Exactly. Pacify the region, but also, critically, get them used to eating indigenous food to break that dangerous reliance on Castilian supplies.
This period also sees some brutal actions.
Yes, led by Alonso de Ojeda. This is where the Spanish strategy shifts from a kind of difficult diplomacy to outright strategic terror.
What did he do?
On April 9th, he leaves the fort with over 100 men. Near the Rio de Oro, he captures a local cacique, his brother, and his nephew.
And sends them back to Isabela in chains.
Yes. The supposed crime was related to some stolen Spanish clothing. Indigenous carriers had taken it to their village, and the cacique refused to return it.
So Hojeda's response was disproportionate.
Deliberately so. In addition to the arrests, he publicly cut off the ears of one of the cacique's subjects in the town square.
That's not justice, that's a message.
It's a calculated act of terror, meant to instill absolute fear and obedience.
So the prisoners arrive in Isabela.
And the cacique follows them, hoping to intercede. The admiral then puts on this public display. He has their hands tied and announces they'll all be put to death.
But he doesn't go through with it.
No. It's pure psychological warfare. The cacique weeps, he pleads, he promises future obedience.
And having gotten that submission.
The admiral mercifully sets them all free. He's established that he holds the power of life and death, and that clemency is conditional on total submission.
And this is when we get that story about the horse.
A perfect example of psychological warfare. A single Spanish horseman comes across a village where some 400 men are preparing to attack Christians.
And the horse alone is enough.
It terrifies them. He puts the entire force to flight, wounding a couple of them.
But then he does something else.
After he crosses the river, he turns around and feigns a charge back across the water. And they flee again because they're convinced the horse can fly. It shows how profoundly alien this technology was.
So with the interior terrified into a temporary submission, the admiral turns his attention back to the sea.
Right. He still believes Cuba is the mainland of Asia, and he's determined to explore it, which means leaving a very unstable government in charge of a very volatile island.
So before he leaves, he has to set up a governing council.
He does. It's a mix of his own family and royal appointees, an attempt to balance power.
Who was on it?
His brother, Don Diego Columbus, was president. Then Fray Beal, Pedro Fernandez Coronel, Alonso Sanchez de Carvajal, and Juan de Luchon.
And then he sets sail.
On Thursday, April 24th. He heads past Tortuga, but gets pushed back to Española by bad winds and currents before he can finally make the crossing to Cuba.
He reaches Cuba on April 29th.
At Port of San Nicolas, yes, and begins to sail along the southern coast. He finds this incredible deep-water harbor he names Puerto Grande.
And what did they find there?
The inhabitants had lots of roast fish and jutillas, a large native rodent, so there was plenty of food.
The interactions with the Cubans were mostly peaceful at this stage.
Very peaceful. The islanders would paddle out in their canoes, believing the Spanish had come from heaven. They'd offer bread and fish and ask for nothing in return.
But the admiral insisted on paying them.
Always.
Yeah.
With glass beads, hawk's bells. It was part of maintaining that image of being these benevolent, godlike visitors.
After Cuba, they sailed towards Jamaica and then back through a really treacherous area.
The Jardín de la Reina, the Queen's Garden. It's this maze of innumerable small, sandy, wooded islands and shoals.
Incredibly dangerous to navigate.
Extremely. The sailors were exhausted, constantly taking depth soundings to avoid running aground. The admiral counted 61 separate islands.
And they made some interesting natural history observations there.
They did. They saw cranes, redbirds, parrots, and huge sea turtles laying their eggs in the sand.
And the air itself was fragrant.
Yes, the accounts mentioned sweet scents on the wind. It was also where they saw that unique indigenous fishing method.
With the suckerfish.
The rolisos. They'd tie a cord to one, and it would detach itself by suction to a big turtle or a large fish.
And they just haul both of them into the canoe.
Exactly. It's an incredible display of local ecological knowledge, using one animal as a living tool to catch another. It was completely foreign to the Europeans.
Before going back to Cuba, though, he makes a detour.
To Jamaica. He'd heard rumors it was rich in gold.
He arrives on May 3rd. What was his impression?
He thought it was the most beautiful island he had yet seen. Lush mountains, great harbors, and he was met by a huge number of canoes.
But the welcome wasn't entirely friendly.
No. In one harbor, El Puerto Bueno, they were met by armed canoes. The locals started hurling darts.
So there was a fight?
A short one. The Spanish crossbowmen fired back, wounded 6 or 7 people, and that was enough to end the hostility. After that, the nearby villages came to trade peacefully.
And there's a really compelling story about a young man from Jamaica.
A very poignant moment. This young indigenous man gets on the ship and insists he wants to go to Castile.
And his family pleads with him to stay.
They follow in canoes, weeping, begging him to come back. But he hides himself on board, completely determined to go. The admiral was so struck by his resolve that he ordered him to be treated well.
So after Jamaica, they resume exploring Cuba, but the expedition is starting to take its toll.
A severe toll. By May, the admiral is completely worn out. He writes in his journal that he sometimes went 8 days without proper sleep. The poor diet, the constant stress, it was breaking him down.
And the provisions were running out.
Critically low. He realized he couldn't continue exploring what he thought was the Asian mainland. He had to turn back to Española before the crew starved.
And on the way back, there's a final memorable encounter in Cuba.
Yes. On July 7th, he goes ashore for Mass, and an elderly cacique watches the whole service very attentively.
And he communicates something profound.
Through an interpreter, he explains his belief in an afterlife, that good souls go to heaven and wicked ones go to hell or stay on earth. And this cacique was well-traveled. He knew the leaders of Española and Jamaica.
But the journey back gets even worse.
Much worse. Near Cape Cruz, they're hit by a violent thunderstorm that floods the ship.
And the crew was in no condition to handle it.
They were exhausted, malnourished, living on rotten biscuits and a little wine. They were too weak to work the pumps effectively. The admiral himself wrote that he feared he would die.
And then he falls gravely ill.
After leaving Jamaica, his body just gives out. The result of all that exertion and poor diet. High fever, memory loss. He even lost his sight for a time. He was sleeping less than 3 hours a day.
The crew had to take over.
Essentially, yes. They abandoned any plans to explore other islands and sailed straight for Isabela, arriving on September 29th. The admiral was sick for more than 5 months after that.
And while he was incapacitated, the situation in Española was managed by the council he left behind.
Which leads us into this period of consolidation, conflict, and ultimately the implementation of the tribute system.
When he finally recovers, he finds his brother has arrived.
Bartholomew Columbus. He'd been sent from Spain with 3 supply ships in 1494.
And the admiral immediately gives him a powerful position.
He appoints him adelantado, or governor of the Indies, which initially caused some friction with the crown since they hadn't approved it, but it was eventually confirmed.
But the island he'd returned to was in chaos.
Complete chaos. And much of it was the fault of Pedro Margaret, the commander he'd left at Fort Santo Tomás.
He didn't follow his orders.
Not at all. He was supposed to patrol and pacify the country. Instead, he and his men just roamed around, stealing from the indigenous people, injuring them. He basically acted like a warlord.
And then he just left.
Abandoned his command, returned to Castile without giving any account for his actions, and left the whole interior in turmoil.
Which predictably led to indigenous retaliation.
Organized retaliation. A cacique named Guataguana killed 10 Christians and orchestrated the burning of a hut with 40 Spaniards inside. The fragile peace was completely broken.
So a major military campaign was necessary to reestablish control.
It was. This led to the war against Caonabó.
On March 24th, 1495, the admiral marches out from Isabela.
And he's not alone. His indigenous ally, Guacanagari, marches with him, a crucial alliance.
And the force they're up against is massive.
Over 100,000 indigenous warriors, according to the accounts, led by Caonabó.
And the Spanish force.
Just 200 infantry, 20 horses, and a few hounds. They were outnumbered 500 to 1.
An impossible fight.
Militarily, yes. So they relied on strategy and terror. The admiral split his tiny force into 2 divisions, one led by him, the other by his brother Bartholomew.
And they attacked from 2 sides at once.
Simultaneously. They used everything in their arsenal arquebus shots. The cavalry charged the dogs. The goal wasn't to kill everyone. It was to create shock and panic.
And it worked.
It worked perfectly. The indigenous army, which had never faced anything like this, broke and fled almost immediately.
And Caonabó was captured.
Captured alive with his family. Since he was blamed for the massacre at Navidad, the admiral decided that capturing him was punishment enough.
So he sent him to Spain.
Yes. It was a political move to show the crown he had subdued a powerful king. But it pacified the island for a time.
The victory was a huge morale boost for the Spanish.
And over the next year, the admiral campaigned across the island, reducing it to what the accounts call obedience and tranquility.
Which set the stage for the final step, the tribute system.
The economic exploitation of the entire population. It was designed to ensure a steady stream of revenue for the crown.
How'd it work?
In the Cibao, the gold region, every indigenous male aged 14 or older had to pay a hawk's bell full of gold dust every 3 months.
And in other areas.
25 pounds of cotton. Every man had to contribute something.
And they had a system to track it.
A brutal, effective system. When you paid, you received a brass or copper token to wear around your neck.
Proof of payment.
And anyone found without that token was subject to punishment. It was a system of total control.
The Spanish had their own interpretation of these events, of course.
A very providential one. They saw the peacefulness that followed Caonabó's capture and their victory as a sign of divine favor. The admiral wrote that it would have been impossible for 200 sick men to win without God's help.
And what happened next only reinforced that belief for them.
Exactly. The indigenous population then suffered from massive food shortages and devastating plagues, which reduced their numbers by as much as 2/3.
The Spanish saw this as God clearing the way for them.
They saw it as a providential act, arguing that without this depopulation, the sheer numbers of the indigenous people would have eventually overwhelmed them. But of course, we now understand this as the catastrophic direct result of colonial contact disease and the complete disruption of their society and agriculture.
Today, we are examining a really pivotal period, focusing on the admiral's return to Spain after his second voyage in 1496, and then the start of the third in 1498.
And it's an era of stark contrasts. On one hand, you have this incredible geographical discovery, the South American mainland.
But on the other, there's this full-blown political crisis, a settler revolt brewing back on Española.
So let's start with the context for that return. The historical accounts frame it as a necessity. He had to report to the Catholic sovereigns, of course.
But it was more than that. It was a defensive move. The accounts mention spiteful, envious men who were sending false reports back to Spain.
Reports designed to damage the reputation of the admiral and his brothers.
Exactly. So he couldn't just send a letter. He had to physically return to court and, defend the entire project in his own honor.
The logistics of that journey home really underscore how precarious everything was back then. He departs from Isabela on March 10th, 1496.
And it's a tiny fleet. Just 2 ships, the Santa Cruz and the Niña.
And on board
225 Christians and 30 indigenous people.
The initial plan was straightforward, right? Just sail east.
Yes, sail directly east. And they did, losing sight of Española by March 22nd. But the problem was the wind.
The easterly trade wind.
Precisely. They were fighting against them. This created incredible fatigue among the crew, ill humor, and critically, their provisions started to run out very, very quickly.
Which forced a change in strategy.
It did. On April 6th, they had to alter course. They bore away south toward the Caribbean islands, just desperate for food and water. They finally anchored at Maria Galante on April 9th.
And that detour, driven by sheer necessity, led to a notable break with tradition.
A major one. The very next day was a Sunday, and normally wouldn't set sail.
But the crew's demand for food was so urgent, they suspended the observance of the Sabbath.
Their priority was survival. And this urgency is what led them directly to Guadalupe.
Once there, the admiral sent armed men ashore.
And the initial encounter was not what they expected at all. Instead of facing male warriors, they were confronted by a large group of armed indigenous women who rushed out of the woods.
Armed with bows, arrows, and plumes, and they adopted a very hostile posture immediately.
The sea was choppy, so the landing party couldn't get right to shore. They sent 2 indigenous people from Española ahead to try and communicate.
To explain, they just wanted to barter for provisions?
Yes, but the women were defiant. They told them to go to the northern side of the island, that their husbands would provide food there.
But the ships didn't listen to that warning.
No, they moved closer, and when the armed boats finally made it to the beach, the inhabitants pulled back, but only to set up what the accounts call an ambush.
An attempt to stop the Christians from landing at all.
The standoff was only broken when the Christians fired their lombards.
Those small cannons on the ships.
Exactly. The sound and the force of the shot terrified the inhabitants, and they retreated, abandoning their homes and all their possessions.
And entering those abandoned homes gave the crew some, well, unexpected cultural insights.
They found essential supplies, parrots, honey, wax, even some iron tools. But the most noted discovery was a domestic one.
The looms.
The looms, yes, used for weaving cloth or tapestry. And the records are very specific that these looms were square.
Which was unusual.
It was. It contrasted with the round looms they had seen on other islands, suggesting a different technological or cultural tradition.
Of course, the immediate priority was food. It's here that the crew learned how to make cassava bread.
A vital skill for survival in the region. But then they made a much more disturbing find.
The one that really solidified the European perception of these people as Caribs or cannibals.
Yes. They found a human hand roasting on a spit inside one of the huts. This discovery had profound consequences for how the Spanish would later justify their treatment of these specific island populations.
While the bread was being prepared, the admiral sent out a reconnaissance party, 40 men.
And they returned the next day with captives, 10 women and 3 boys. The rest of the population had managed to flee.
And one of these captives, a female cacique, a local leader, was particularly noteworthy.
She was. The history tells this dramatic story of her attempting to escape. A Canary Islander with the admiral, known for being very swift, tried to stop her.
And she fought back.
Viciously. She wrestled him to the ground and was apparently so strong that the chronicler believed she would have choked him to death if other Christians hadn't jumped in to save him.
It's an incredible anecdote, really highlighting the physical prowess of these women.
It does, and the descriptions of the women from Guadalupe and Jamaica go into a lot of detail about their appearance.
Specifically, the body modifications.
Right. They had this practice of tightly bandaging their legs with woven cotton, something called cotra.
From the calf to the knee.
Yes, and it was done deliberately to make their legs appear thicker. The text notes that thin legs were considered unattractive. It was a cultural standard of beauty.
And they did something similar with their arms.
Both men and women would bandage their arms up to the armpit like military armlets.
The general description says they were well-proportioned, moved with poise, had long hair.
And that they were skilled archers, shooting their bows while completely naked. All except for 4 men who were present during the encounter.
And the captured cacique explained their presence.
She did. She said these men only visit the women for a certain period each year. A custom, she noted, was also shared by the women of an island called Matnino.
Which suggests a matriarchal, or at least a highly autonomous female society.
It certainly points in that direction. The admiral was also impressed by their intelligence.
More so than other islanders.
Yes. He noted that while others seemed to measure time simply by day and by moon, the women of Guadalupe had some astronomical knowledge. They kept time by observing specific stars, noting when the star complex known as the Car would rise, or when another star would descend.
So after securing 20 days' worth of bread, they prepared to leave.
And the admiral, perhaps recognizing the violence of how they'd gotten their provisions, attempted a kind of diplomatic atonement.
He gave gifts to the remaining women.
To compensate for the injuries his men had inflicted, he sent all the captives ashore, except for 2.
The lady cacique and her daughter, who had agreed to go to Castile.
Correct. Also on board was King Caonabó, a major Taino leader from Española, though he was of Carib-speaking origin. He was being transported as a prisoner.
They departed on April 20th, but the journey back was not easy.
It was agonizingly slow. The sailors hadn't yet mastered the technique of sailing far north to catch the favorable winds home. As a result, they made little progress, and the provisions began to run out again.
By May 20th, the rations were at starvation levels.
Just 6 ounces of bread, a pint of water, and a half pint of something else per day. It was dire.
And this scarcity led to a serious navigational crisis.
It revealed a huge gap between the admiral's skills and those of his pilots. There were 8 or 10 experienced pilots on board, and none of them could agree on where they were.
But Columbus was certain.
He was supremely confident, and he recorded a very complex magnetic phenomenon in his journal, a key moment in the history of cartography.
What did he observe?
He noted that the Flemish magnetic needles they had on board varied a point to the northwest.
Okay.
But the Genoese needles varied to the northeast. Yet when they sailed east-northeast, both sets of needles settled toward true north.
Meaning their position on the meridian was affecting the magnetic reading.
Precisely. And this is what gave him his confidence. On May 22nd, he concluded they were exactly 100 leagues west of the Azores. He theorized that the lodestone used to magnetize the needles had a different influence depending on the meridian.
He was developing a very early but profound understanding of magnetic declination.
Yeah.
Something his pilots just couldn't grasp.
But even with his navigational skill, the human cost was becoming unbearable. The starvation was so severe.
That the sailors made a desperate proposal.
A truly dark one. Some of them suggested eating the indigenous people they had on board, who they classified as Carib captives.
To conserve what little food was left.
That was the argument. Another proposal was to just throw them overboard.
But the admiral refused.
Absolutely. He strictly forbade it. He appealed to their common humanity, arguing that as Christians, they could not treat these people worse than anyone else. He promised them land would be sighted soon.
And he was right.
He was. Within 24 hours, they sighted land near Odemira, between Lisbon and Cape St. Vincent. That moment secured him immense respect among the seamen. They saw him as the most expert mariner of the age.
His arrival in Castile, then, presented a complete contrast to the horrors of the voyage.
A total one. He arrived just as the Catholic sovereigns were in Burgos, celebrating the marriage of Prince Don Juan.
And Columbus came prepared with a spectacular presentation for the court.
He did. The quality and quantity of the gifts were designed to impress.
What did he bring?
Gold, of course, but also specimens of plants and animals, unique tools, belts, masks set with gold plates, and the main attraction, massive nuggets of raw gold dust.
One weighing over 30 pounds.
Imagine that. It was a stunning demonstration of the wealth of the Indies, and for a time, it completely silenced his critics. The sovereigns were overjoyed.
After that success, his focus turned immediately back to Española.
He was deeply worried about what might have happened in his absence. Disorder, misfortune among the settlers.
But the bureaucracy moved slowly.
Agonizingly so. Just getting 2 relief ships dispatched under Captain Pedro Fernandez Colonel took nearly a year. 10 to 12 months.
So the admiral was forced to stay in Spain for over a year himself.
Yes, until February 1497, just to personally oversee the outfitting of the fleet for his 3rd voyage.
And during this long delay, his political enemies began to consolidate their power.
This is where the real trouble begins. The initial warm reception from the sovereigns started to cool. Those envious men kept up a constant stream of lies and accusations.
To the point that the royals began to tolerate open insults and offenses against him.
The administrative paralysis really centered around one figure, Juan de Fonseca, the Archdeacon of Seville, and his associate, Juan Lopez,
who later became the Bishop of Burgos.
That's the one. Their neglect and outright mismanagement deliberately delayed the fleet. The accounts describe a mortal hatred developing between Fonseca and the admiral.
Fonseca became the center of a powerful court faction dedicated to undermining Columbus.
It got so bad that in June of 1497, the admiral had to send his brother Don Diego to Seville just to try and hurry things along.
But despite all this political resistance, the 3rd voyage did finally get underway.
It did. On May 30th, 1498, Columbus set sail from San Lucar de Barmeda with 6 vessels.
And 3 of those ships were absolutely critical.
They were loaded entirely with provisions for the settlers in Española who had been waiting for over a year at this point.
The first part of the journey was routine. Stops at Fort of Santo, then Madeira.
Right, for wood, water, supplies. But then a notable incident occurred at Gomera on June 19th.
They encountered a French warship.
A French warship that had just captured 2 Spanish vessels. The French crew, seeing Columbus's fleet, thought they were easy prey at first.
They quickly realized their mistake.
Very quickly. They slipped their anchor cables and tried to flee. Columbus pursued, thinking they were corsairs. The French ship got away, but they left behind their prizes.
So Columbus recaptured the Spanish vessels.
and 6 captured Spaniards, along with 4 of the French crew. In a diplomatic gesture, he agreed to a prisoner exchange.
After leaving Gomera, Columbus made a key strategic decision.
A very important one. He divided the fleet.
He sent 3 ships with the provisions directly to Española.
Under the command of Pedro de Arana, Alonso Sanchez de Carvajal, and Juan Antonio Colombo, with very detailed instructions.
While he took the remaining 3 ships south to the Cape Verde Islands.
His true goal was to find a continent he believed lay south of the islands he already knew.
But that southern route immediately took a toll on his health.
The climate in the Cape Verde region was notoriously unhealthy. He suffered a severe attack of gout, followed by a terrible fever that left him incapacitated for 4 days.
Even so, the accounts say he kept meticulously recording the ship's progress.
Obsessively. He arrived at Sal in the Cape Verdes on June 27th, then went to Boa Vista, which is described as a miserable and melancholy place.
They anchored near an island with a few houses for lepers.
Yes, and the Portuguese governor came to pay his respects. Columbus asked him about the local remedy for leprosy.
What was it?
He was told it was primarily the temperate climate, but also a diet of turtle meat and smearing themselves with turtle's blood, though it was a very long treatment.
That stop at Boa Vista also provided some interesting natural history.
It's famous for its turtle population. The records note that huge numbers of turtles came ashore to lay eggs in June, July, and August.
And the hunting technique was remarkably simple.
At night, hunters would track them with lanterns and find the turtles often asleep on the beach, exhausted from their journey. They would just flip them over onto their backs and leave them there to collect in the morning.
But the island itself was barren.
Incredibly so. Very dry, no trees, no crops, and the well water was salty. The Portuguese were there mainly to manage the export of salt and goats.
The goat population was a success story, though.
It was. The entire herd descended from just 8 goats brought there years before. They had multiplied so much that hunters could live on goat meat and fish for months without bread.
But the unhealthy climate was a major concern.
A huge concern. Columbus left Santiago on July 5th, worried his men would fall sick. He noted a constant thick haze and that 3/4 of the local population were visibly ill.
And now begins the real navigational challenge of a third voyage.
Yes. His plan was revolutionary for the time. Sail southwest until he was below the equator, and then turn due west to find this new landmass.
But the currents were against him.
Strong north and northeast currents made it very difficult, and this southern course led them into a climate crisis.
They sailed into what sources describe as a furnace.
For 8 straight days, they were in this intense, scorching heat. It was so extreme it damaged the ships themselves. Casks of wine burst their hoops, wheat was scorched. It was a disaster.
This forced him to abandon the equatorial plan.
He had to. He turned north, deciding not to venture south again until the weather changed.
And it was during this period that he made some critical astronomical observations.
Really complex ones. He was focused on the altitude of the North Star. He noted that its height above the horizon changed dramatically depending on the position of the guard's star group.
A 10-degree difference, suggesting a circular path.
Exactly. And he found this very difficult to reconcile with the idea of a perfectly spherical Earth.
So he developed his own theory.
A fascinating one. He concluded that near the equator, the sky appears more oblique, and that this variability of the North Star was somehow linked to the magnetic needle.
It led to his famous theory that the Earth was not a perfect sphere, but pear-shaped.
Yes, with a sort of nipple-like protrusion at this point. It was an incorrect theory, of course, but it was a brilliant attempt to synthesize all this conflicting navigational data he was gathering.
This change, of course, away from the heat and with provisions low, led directly to the main discovery.
On July 31st, 1498, he had decided against sailing directly for Española, fearing mutiny and desperately needing water.
And at noon that day,
A sailor, Alonso Perez Nazardo from the Crow's Nest, saw 3 mountains about 15 leagues to the west.
a profound moment.
It was. They gave thanks to God, recited the Hail Mary, and seeing those 3 peaks, the admiral named the island Trinidad for the Holy Trinity,
They sailed toward a cape they named Cabo de la Galera.
because it looked like a galley under sail. The next morning, they anchored at Punta de la Playa. They found no people but saw signs of them fishing tackle and footprints of what they correctly guessed were monkeys.
And the great discovery, the continent itself, happened the next day, August 1st.
Sailing south, they saw land about 25 leagues away. At first, Columbus thought it was just another island and named it Isla Santa.
But it was the mainland.
It was, the coast of what is now Venezuela. The region was beautiful, with woods right down to the water, dotted with villages.
But the geography was strange. They noticed powerful westward currents.
And an astonishingly high tide. The records claim it rose and fell over 60 feet, which is physically unlikely, but it speaks to the immense force of the water they were witnessing. This fueled his belief that this place was unique.
Their first real interaction happened at the western tip of Trinidad, a place they named Punta del Arenal.
A canoe with 25 indigenous people approached. A warning shot from a Lombard made them pause.
They tried to barter.
Yes, they offered brass pots, mirrors, things that had worked on the islands. But it failed. So Columbus tried something else.
The musical performance.
A pipe and tabor player on the prow, singing, dancing, a kettle drum. He was trying to lure them in.
But they interpreted it as a threat.
Completely. They saw it as an act of aggression, picked up their shields, and prepared to shoot arrows. The admiral immediately stopped the music.
A second encounter was more successful.
Much more. A canoe from a place called Vaquenia, piloted by a respected individual, approached. They accepted some trinkets and promised to bring bread back from their homes.
And the description of these people was very positive.
Very handsome appearance, lighter skin than others they'd met. They seemed to have a higher level of intelligence and a better disposition.
It's in Chapter 70 that the realization of the mainland truly dawns.
After finding excellent water by digging wells in the sand, he started to map the Gulf of Paria. He saw it was enclosed by Trinidad and this new mainland.
He named the two entrances.
The northern one, Boca del Dragon, the Dragon's Mouth. The southern one, Boca de las Sierpes, the Serpent's Mouth.
Serpent's Mouth was incredibly dangerous.
The water rushed through with a furious sound, and then a colossal wave, described as a mountain of water, rose up and nearly swamped the ships.
It was only by quick maneuvering they survived.
The force was so great it snapped one ship's anchor cable. After passing that danger, he sailed on, still thinking Paria might be an island, but the geography kept telling him otherwise.
It felt like a giant harbor, enclosed by land on all sides.
That's right. On August 5th, they went ashore. The crew of the Caravel Corio managed to capture 3 men in a canoe.
And the admiral's response was diplomatic.
Very. He treated them kindly, gave them gifts, and sent them back. It worked perfectly. They soon returned with others, ready to barter.
And these people were culturally distinct.
Yes, no wooden shields, and their arrows weren't poisoned like the Caribs. They wore finely woven, colored cotton cloths.
And they prized brass and hawks' bells even more than the people of Española.
A curious detail was that while the men covered their private parts, the women, according to the accounts, covered nothing at all.
The first signs of real wealth appeared here.
Small gold mirrors worn around their necks. Columbus secured 6 individuals to take with him, now convinced this Isla de Gracia, as he called it, was a continent.
And then they found something even more valuable.
Pearls. On a nearby island, they saw women wearing strings of beads mixed with large and small pearls. He immediately bartered for samples to send to the sovereigns.
And the locals told him the pearls were found in oyster shells to the west and north.
Yes. The encounters here were very positive. They were escorted to the king's palace, then his son's palace, and given food and wine. They were fair-skinned and cut their hair short in what was described as the Castilian fashion.
The final exit from the Gulf through the Dragon's Mouth confirmed his theory.
The water depth dropped suddenly, and it was brackish. It tasted like river water. This was the key. It meant a massive influx of fresh water.
From a continental source.
He was too cautious to take his large ship into the shallows, so he sent the small Caravel Corio to investigate.
And it returned with definitive proof.
A large bay fed by 4 rivers of sweet water. So much fresh water that even 40 leagues out to sea, it was sweeter than at the river mouths.
That was the final piece of the puzzle for him.
He concluded it had to be a single, vast continent. He named the region the Golfo de las Perlas, the Gulf of Pearls. He even cited the Book of Esdras from the Apocrypha to support his idea that such a large landmass must exist.
On August 13th, he finally turned toward Española.
And even then, he was making detailed navigational notes. On August 16th, he recorded the magnetic needles varying again, confirming his earlier theories about declination. He regretted he couldn't explore the coast further.
He finally anchored off Española on August 20th.
And immediately sent letters to his brother, the Adelantado, Bartholomew Columbus, who had, in his absence, founded the city of Santo Domingo.
When the admiral arrived in the city on August 30th, he was nearly blind from the strain of the voyage.
And he walked into a catastrophe. The entire island was in chaos. Over 160 men were dead or sick, many with what was then called the French sickness, which we now know as syphilis,
And a huge number of settlers had joined a rebellion.
led by Francisco Roldán. And Roldán wasn't just some disgruntled settler. He was the alcalde mayor, the chief justice, appointed by Columbus himself. He had immense authority.
And he used the Adelantado's absence on a trip to Zaragua to make his move.
He seized a caravel that had been built at Isabela, claiming it was unfit to sail. His real goal was to prevent the government from sending messages back to Spain.
His rebellion appealed to the discontented.
Men who wanted to evade work. Roldán promised them everything: a share of the island's wealth, the use of indigenous people as free labor, and access to indigenous women, which the Adelantado had forbidden.
He painted the Columbus brothers as tyrants.
A very effective propaganda campaign. And in Chapter 75, we see it escalate to treason. Roldán actively plotted to assassinate the Adelantado.
He also planned to seize the Conception fortress.
But the commander there, Ballester, was loyal and warned the Adelantado, who rushed there with 40 men to confront him.
The coup failed.
It did. So Roldán retreated to Isabela, where he plundered the royal storehouse, taking all the food, weapons, and supplies. Don Diego Columbus was forced to take refuge in the fortress,
Roldán then moved his base of operations to Zaragua.
where he began to incite a full-scale indigenous revolt. He told the local leaders that the Adelantado was greedy and harsh, and that they should refuse to pay the tribute.
And it worked.
The tribute collection stopped, which cut off the government from its main source of provisions.
This instability led to another plot by the cacique Guaranex.
Yes, he planned a surprise attack to kill all the Christians in his province. But it failed due to a miscalculation. His chief advisor got the date of the full moon wrong.
The delay gave the Adelantado time to react.
He repelled the attack, and Guaranex fled. Roldán, ever the opportunist, immediately declared himself the protector of the indigenous people.
But his protection came at a much higher price.
A much higher tribute, a calabash of gold dust every 3 months. And he took the cacique's sons and nephews as hostages to ensure payment.
The situation was dire when 2 relief ships finally arrived from Spain.
This was in February 1497. The supplies gave the Loyalists a boost of morale. Roldán, meanwhile, moved his forces near Santo Domingo, hoping to win over the new arrivals.
The captain of the ships, Pedro Fernandez Coronel, tried to negotiate.
But Roldán was too proud and too fearful of punishment to make any concessions. The talks failed, and the rebels retreated back to Zaragua.
And then things got even more complicated.
The other 3 ships, the ones Columbus had sent directly from the Canaries, got blown off course and landed right in Zaragua, where the rebels were.
One of the captains, Carvajal, tried to negotiate again.
And again, he failed. Another captain, Juan Antonio Colombo, marched 40 newly arrived laborers overland to confront Roldán, arguing they were there to work for the crown, not to become rebels.
Roldán just claimed he couldn't control his men.
A convenient excuse. When the captains finally reached the admiral in Santo Domingo, he decided on a policy of moderation, fearing a civil war. He issued a decree offering free passage home to anyone who wanted to leave.
But Roldán was planning another attack.
Ballester, the commander at Concepcion, warned the admiral that Roldán and his lieutenants were planning to capture him. Roldán now demanded the release of all indigenous people from the admiral's control as a precondition for any talks.
Roldán also insisted on negotiating only through Carvajal.
But the admiral had become deeply suspicious of Carvajal. He compiled a list of 7 points suggesting Carvajal was either complicit with the rebels or being manipulated by them, such as the timing of his arrival, the fact that laborers were sent ashore with swords, that Roldán's lieutenants were held prisoner for 2 days without Carvajal knowing. It all looked very suspicious.
Roldán then sent an incredibly insolent letter.
On October 17th, yes, blaming the entire revolt on the Adelantado and demanding total freedom of action.
The admiral's position was critical. He had maybe 40 reliable men left.
So, in a final attempt at diplomacy, he sent a message through Carvajal promising Roldán favor with the sovereigns if he would just submit. It was a move to remove any pretext Roldán had for further violence.
And then he acted decisively to secure his position with the crown.
On October 18th, he dispatched 5 ships, 3 for Spain, with a detailed account of the entire rebellion explaining everything.
And the other 2.
They were to resupply his brother. He also, despite his suspicions, tasked Carvajal with continuing the exploration of the Paria mainland and organizing the pearl trade, sending the samples he'd collected back to the sovereigns.
A move designed to show that, despite the political chaos, the discoveries were still immensely valuable.
Exactly. Hoping the promise of pearls would outweigh the reality of the rebellion.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available on this channel. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs. While this is an AI recording, the research that has gone into this production is comprehensive and focuses on very specific moments in history designed to bring as much detail to the listener as possible. Thanks again for listening in.